Welcome back, everyone, to the Energy Reset Summit 2021. I'm your co-host, Dr. Rick Dina, whole food plant-based since 1987. For this interview, we have Dr. CyrusKhambatta, who is a New York Times best-selling author of Mastering Diabetes, the revolutionary method to reverse insulin resistance permanently in type 1, 1.5, type 2, prediabetes, and gestational diabetes. He is the co-founder of Mastering Diabetes and Amla Green, and is an internationally recognized nutrition and fitness coach who has been living with type 1 diabetes since 2002. He co-created the Mastering Diabetes method to reverse insulin resistance in all forms of diabetes and has helped more than 10,000 people improve their metabolic health using low-fat, plant-based, whole food nutrition, intermittent fasting, and exercise. Cyrus earned a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Stanford University in 2003, then earned a PhD in Nutritional Biochemistry from the University of California at Berkeley in 2012. He's the co-author of many peer-reviewed scientific publications. So Dr. Khambatta, that makes it sound like it's going to be a very informative interview, so welcome to the summit.
Thanks so much, Dr. Rick. It's always a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, and vice versa. We're really happy to have you. So to get started, why don't you tell us what initially got you interested in whole food plant-based eating and how that led to what you do now professionally?
This is a great question. So I actually kind of grew up thinking that I was a healthy eater, but the term healthy is it's pretty vague, because I think most people think that they're healthy, and I definitely fell into that category. But my whole world got flipped upside down when I was 22 years old, because at that time, I was actually diagnosed with 3 autoimmune conditions within 6 months of each other. So I began to learn about all this when I actually went to the hospital, because my blood glucose was alarmingly high. I was extremely lethargic. I was urinating frequently. I was drinking 2 gallons of water a day. And when I checked myself into the hospital, they found out that my blood glucose was in the 600s, which is 6 times higher than it was supposed to be. So I ended up getting diagnosed with type 1 diabetes right then and on the spot. And the doctors actually uncovered that during that 24-hour period when I was in the hospital, that I actually had 3 autoimmune conditions. So type 1 diabetes, Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, and then alopecia universalis, which is why, as you can see, I have no hair, no eyebrows, no eyelashes, you name it. And so, at a young age, I got scared. I got real scared, because I thought that I had done something wrong, and that, I was causing all of these autoimmune conditions to start happening one by one. And so in the first year of living with all 3 of these autoimmune conditions, I just wanted to feel normal. I mean, I was not very old. I was still finishing college, and I just wanted to be a normal guy. And so the doctors had told me to eat a low carbohydrate diet, because that's this sort of one size fits all prescription for, all forms of diabetes. And it continues to be that way to the day, all the way to today. So I ate a low carbohydrate diet, just like they told me to. And, I was trying to clean up my diet to a certain extent, but they told me to eat, large amounts of dairy products and fish and chicken and meat and peanut butter and turkey burgers, and try to limit my intake of, fruits and vegetables and beans and starchy potatoes. And, in addition to that, like things like rice and corn. And so I was following that advice, and it was supposed to make my blood glucose more controllable, but it did the exact opposite. My blood glucose was a disaster. I mean, I really wish that I'd cataloged how disastrous my blood glucose was, because it was up and down all day long. It could be as low as 40, which is a very dangerous low blood glucose, or as high as 400 at any given moment of the day. And it really felt like my blood glucose meter had just turned into a random number generator. So I got frustrated. So I ended up looking for more information, and one thing led to another. And I never set out to become a plant-based eater in the first place. I'll be the first person to tell you. It was 2003. There wasn't that much information about plant-based diets. I just wanted to feel less crappy. It was that simple. And one thing led to another, and I ended up learning about people who ate raw food. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? There are people who eat fruits and vegetables all day long and nothing else? I didn't even know that was a thing. And so I actually ended up learning how to become a whole food plant-based eater. and actually learning how to eat a raw food diet by the guy that both of us know very well. His name is Dr. Doug Graham. And Dr. Doug Graham sort of educated me about the process and showed me how if I switched my diet over to eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, that I would not only feel a lot better, but it would actually help me control type 1 diabetes better. I didn't believe him when we first started the process. And he said, I know you don't believe me. I don't want you to believe me. I want you to experience it. And I said, fine. So over the course of the first week under his guidance, my blood glucose became extremely controllable. My insulin use dropped big time. But the funny part, and I know you know this, Rick, is that I was eating, when I switched over to eating just like he recommended, I was eating plates of fruit, which is the exact opposite of what the previous doctors had told me in the traditional medical model. So I was eating more carbohydrate-rich foods than I had ever eaten in my life. Yeah, I was eating 600 grams, 700 grams of carbohydrate per day. And yet, despite the fact that I was eating so much carbohydrate, my glucose was falling and my insulin use was falling and my energy levels were going up and I felt more hydrated and I could sleep better and I could exercise more. And I was like, this is very interesting. So I put myself back to graduate school to go get a graduate degree in nutritional biochemistry. And while I was at UC Berkeley for 5 years getting a PhD, my goal was to try and understand, like, what the heck, what is happening inside of me? Like, what is this? And why am I doing the exact opposite of what the medical model is telling me to do? But yet I'm actually getting much better results than I had ever gotten before. And while I was there at UC Berkeley, I learned that not only was I not a freak of nature, that I wasn't some like genetic anomaly, that the physiology that I was experiencing is something that had been very well documented in the medical literature. And in fact, it's been written about for over 100 years. It's just that information hadn't really been brought forward and hasn't been applied in the traditional medical model. So as a result of that, the methods that are being used right now are either outdated or incorrect to begin with. And so long story short, that brings us to today, 18 years after I transitioned to a low-fat plant-based whole food diet. Never once have I looked back. Never once. My desire to eat chicken, meat, fish, turkey, burgers, you name it, pretty much disappeared within the first 6 months.
Awesome.
And here I am today, feeling like $1 million.
That sounds fantastic. And so how does that translate then into, so you said, plates of fruit, I'm assuming vegetables were in there. So how does that translate into, say, a daily diet today?
Yeah, that's a good question. So full disclosure, I was taught how to eat a raw food diet back in 2002, and I ate nothing but raw food for about 14 years. And then somewhere around 2016, 2017, I decided I wanted to start putting more cooked vegetables into my diet. And so I started integrating things like cooked broccoli, cooked cauliflower, you name it. And then I ventured into some potatoes and squash and corn and, quinoa and beyond. So now my diet is, call it, 70% raw, 30% cooked, something like that. But to answer your question, what I like to do, the simple way that I think about it is I like to eat a fruit-heavy breakfast, a fruit-heavy lunch, and then transition to more either vegetables and or like cooked legumes starting in the afternoon hours towards dinner. So what that means is that for breakfast, I'll be eating something like maybe 3 bananas, one of those big Meridol papayas, like half of one of those big papayas. If it's mango season, I will eat 3 or 4 mangoes for breakfast. And then I'll go exercise in the morning hours. And then when I'm back from exercise, I'll usually make a giant smoothie bowl. And so the smoothie bowl contains some frozen fruit. It contains some fresh fruit blended in. I cut some fresh fruit on top. I top it with some chia seeds, maybe some flax seeds. And it's a huge creation. It's probably about 1,000 calories or so.
Any greens in there, or is it just fruit?
Actually, I don't put greens in my smoothie.
Aha.
But I know that there are lots of people who do put greens in their smoothie. I'm not averse to doing it. Most of the time, I literally just forget. So yeah, I have this giant smoothie bowl, and then usually in the afternoon hours is when I transition over to like chickpeas as an example. So I start eating some like chickpeas, maybe some broccoli at that time, and then for dinner I'm usually eating a vegetable heavy salad. Okay. Or a vegetable heavy dish that maybe also is slightly cooked, but something of that resort.
All right, that sounds really good, Dr. Khambatta. So one thing I wanted to ask you here that I think the audience can wrap their brains around energy. First of all, two things. So number one, when people think of blood sugar and say complex carbohydrates, you mentioned chickpeas and quinoa and other things like that. I think they can wrap their brain around that. But fruit, that's even a further departure. So how is it that actually works in terms of helping to regulate your blood sugar?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you're asking this question, actually, because in the world of diabetes, there's this faux pas that, fruit equals sugar, and sugar's going to require a lot of insulin, and sugar's going to make you fat, and sugar is going to worsen your diabetes health. It's going to make you more diabetic, right? That's the sort of rhetoric that you hear in today's pop science world,
yep.
Right?
Pop science world.
I mean, it's true. You read it on the covers of magazines that are in the grocery store. You see it on ads on the internet, and you see people on Instagram and YouTube saying the same story. And
right, and the people who wrote these things have not spent 5 years getting a PhD studying what causes insulin resistance like you. So that's why we want to hear your perspective here,
exactly,
as well as living with it every day.
Exactly right. So in order to fully understand fruit, what I think we have to do is take a quick side story or a quick departure away from fruit and just try and figure out what are whole foods in general. And then based off of that, we can kind of move backwards towards fruit. So a simple way to think about whole foods, whether we're talking about fruits or starchy vegetables or legumes or whole grains or green leafy vegetables or mushrooms, okay, foods that come from the plant-based world, effectively. Okay, most people will take a look at an orange and they'll say, oh, it's vitamin C. They'll take a look at a banana, say, oh, okay, that's just potassium, right? What they're doing is they're playing this reductionism game where they're identifying an object or an actual whole food, and they are simplifying that food down to one nutrient which it happens to contain. Okay. And so the association that people make is they go, oh, okay, that food represents this nutrient. But if you apply that methodology to whole foods, you miss the bigger picture. Okay. Whole foods are, like the name implies, whole foods. They contain a wide array of nutrients, both macronutrients and micronutrients. Okay. So the macronutrients are carbohydrate, fat, and protein. Okay. So the carbohydrate, fat, and protein are present in all whole foods. In addition to that, all whole foods contain vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals. Okay. So what we're talking about here is every single whole food that you can identify, whether it's a blueberry or a sweet potato, a portobello mushroom or a black bean. I don't care what it is. Anything that's a whole food contains all 9 of these components. They just contain them in slightly different quantities. So a citrus, like an orange as an example, might contain a little bit more vitamin C than you would find in quinoa. Okay. Broccoli might contain more fiber than you would find in a blueberry. I don't even really know. Okay. So what you want to do is just sort of think about all of these whole foods as being, they're different. They all contain all 9 essential macronutrients and micronutrients. They just have them in slightly different amounts. Okay. So another way to think about this is that fiber is actually a structural molecule, which is a fascinating beast. So imagine fiber is acting like rebar. Okay. So imagine you if you've ever seen a highway being constructed or like an overpass being constructed, before they pour the concrete into the actual structure, they have to frame the entire structure. So they frame the entire structure with wood, and then they have rebar, which are literally like metal rods that line the inside of what is going to be a concrete column, right? So once they have the frame around it, once they have the rebar inside of it, then they get the concrete trucks to come in, and the concrete trucks then pour the concrete inside of this frame, and then they end up with something that looks like a column. That column then becomes the support for the entire overpass, and they do the same thing for the top part of the overpass, right? So the reason why that's important is because when you look at an overpass from the outside, it just looks like a bunch of concrete. But when you actually look at it from the inside, it has structural elements on the inside that actually hold it together, mainly the rebar. Same thing happens for whole foods. Okay. The rebar inside of whole foods is fiber. Okay. It's this three-dimensional component that basically like holds the whole food together. Okay. So it's there to give it its shape. It's there to give it a texture. It's there to give it a density. And when that fiber is acting as rebar, then all the other micronutrients and macronutrients are actually inside of a mesh network that is held together primarily by that fiber molecule, that collection of fiber molecules, right? So what that means is that when you go and eat that three-dimensional matrix of nutrients, what ends up happening is that three-dimensional matrix has to go inside of your digestive system and then get opened, get torn apart, get denatured, get linearized, and then get cut in order to actually be useful as energy, right? The fiber itself requires an enzyme called cellulase. And cellulase is not something that you and I make. We human beings don't make it. But the bacteria inside of our large intestine do make cellulase. So the fiber is not actually a food for you. It's a food for your bacteria. And that's a good thing because the bacteria end up decomposing or basically cutting that fiber into individual glucose molecules. They then use it. They use it to metabolize. They use it to grow. They use it to colonize. And then they end up manufacturing short chain fatty acids, which are really powerful anti-inflammatory chemicals. Okay. But aside from fiber, there's all the other macronutrients and micronutrients, which take time for your digestive system to get access to absorb, to transport, and then to absorb into tissues. Okay.
So that's even the case with fruit. It has all that fiber. That's what you're getting at, I guess. Yes.
Exactly right. So people think, oh, okay, I look at a banana, it's just a pile of sugar. And the reality is, no, it's got a three-dimensional fiber network. And that three-dimensional fiber network is, yes, it's holding a significant amount of carbohydrate energy. There's no question about it. But because the fiber is present, the fiber will slow down the process of putting glucose into your blood. And as a result of that, you don't have this fear that when you're eating fruit that all of a sudden it's just going to cause your blood glucose to go extremely high.
Right.
And that it's not going to be necessarily like a dangerous food for you as far as, your blood glucose is concerned.
Right. That's awesome. And so like most people don't realize, for example, you mentioned bananas, their glycemic index is about mid 50s, just about makes it into the low glycemic category. People are like, what? Bananas, all that sugar, low glycemic. How could that be?
Absolutely.
And then from personal experience, because you're checking your glucose all the time,
yep,
that works. Okay, so the bottom line is the fiber and the whole food matrix and the other things in there allow even something that comes packaged as simple sugars, because all that other stuff is there. It's like a time release mechanism and helps things work properly. So
that's exactly right.
That sounds awesome.
You got it.
People also wonder if, like fruits and vegetables, okay, they think of a salad, they think of the little side dish of a couple mandarin oranges or something like that. And how is it that you actually get enough energy? I mean, you're physically active. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. I mean, you can get enough energy mostly eating fruits and vegetables?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question, actually, because I've done the math on it and I tried to figure out how many calories does my body require in order to actually, either stay weight stable or gain weight, and also have plenty of available energy to be able to perform work and be able to be cognitively active, right? So for me, over the course of, many years, I've been able to determine that number is somewhere between 3,200 and 3,400 calories per day.
That's a lot.
I have a very high calorie requirement. And the reason I have a high calorie requirement is because your total calorie requirement is a combination of three variables. Number one, your basal metabolic rate, which is the amount of energy that it requires just to, operate your normal human frame, right? It would be the amount of energy required for you to lie on your back for 24 hours.
Right, hang out on the couch.
Exactly. How much energy does it take to operate your brain, your heart, your lungs, your kidney, you name it, right? So that's your basal metabolic rate. Yeah. In addition to that, you have what's called your thermic effective food, your TEF. Your thermic effective food is effectively the energy that is required in order to digest the food that you're consuming. And a simple calculation for that is that it is approximately 10% of all the calories that you're consuming. So if you're eating, we'll call it 2,000 calories a day, then it's going to require approximately 200 calories in order to metabolize that food. All right. And then the third component to your energy expenditure is your activity levels. Okay, so your activity levels, whether you like to, whether you live an active lifestyle and you just happen to be, like moving around on a daily basis, or whether you are going to the gym and performing exercise, or you're a marathon runner, you name it. You sum total all the energy that you expend in exercise, and you add that to your TEF and you add that to your BMR, and that's your total energy requirement. Okay, mine's 3,200 to 3,400 on a daily basis, depending on what I do. Right. So the question you brought up is, can you eat 32 to 3,400 calories from fruits and vegetables? And the answer is absolutely. The answer is it's not that hard. The answer is I used to believe that it was impossible to do, but it's actually very easy to do. So if I was just eating salads all day long, and when I say salads, I mean like green leafy vegetables with some non-starchy vegetables. So suppose I was eating things like kale and arugula and spinach and cabbage as the greens, as the base. And then to that, I was adding things like cucumber and broccoli and carrots and tomatoes and, maybe a couple fruits here and there. I could eat literally a barrel full of that, and I would barely hit 3,200 calories for the day. Okay?
If you could even do it.
If you could do it. Yeah, it'd be extremely challenging. And digestively, it wouldn't work. Because the amount of mass that you have to put inside of your digestive system just to get
30 to 40 pounds of food.
Right.
So,
right. Because
like you said, a barrel.
Per bite, the number of calories that you're getting from those foods is so low that you have to eat a ridiculous amount of those foods in order to get energy. So that's part of the reason why, that's the main reason why I love eating fruit, because fruit is more energy dense. And every bite of fruit contains probably conservatively 8 to 10 times the number of calories that you would get from non-starchy vegetables, maybe even more. So, when you're eating one banana, just for frame of reference here, one banana is approximately equal to 100 calories, right? So if I'm going to eat 3,000 calories, that would be the equivalent of approximately 30 bananas, right? Such a simple way to think about it. But if you're eating a diet that contains a significant amount of fruit per day, and in my situation, I eat easily 15 servings of fruit per day, right? So that right there is like almost 1,500 calories. And then in addition to that, I eat legumes, I eat some quinoa, I have some potatoes here and there, I had some squash, I had some corns, I got some peas, and then I have, vegetables to come along with it. Getting to 3,000 calories and beyond is just not that hard.
And okay, so you don't have to eat an entire barrel full of food, but it still sounds like that might be a small barrel. I mean, there's a lot of food coming in, it sounds like.
That's a true statement. So in comparison to the way that, a standard American diet might, the portion sizes of a standard American diet, right? There's no question that when you eat a plant-based diet, you eat more food, right? Of the volume of food you're eating, the size of the meals you eat is larger. But you know what? If you like to eat, that's a good thing.
It's fun.
Yeah, it's super fun. And
Nice.
So I wouldn't say that that's anything to be intimidated by. I would say that's actually something to look forward to.
I mean, yeah, eat all you want and maintain a healthy weight and keep your body fat low. That's encouraging for people.
Absolutely. No question.
Okay. So in other words, you can get enough calories. You just have to eat more to weigh less, as Dr. Dean Ornish's book from many years ago says.
That's exactly right.
Excellent. Now, you also mentioned that vegetables aren't there with every meal, but it sounds like on the whole, there's a significant amount of vegetables in your diet. So let's see. So I'm going to back up for just a second. So in that large volume of food, you got a lot of rebar in there. You got all that fiber, you have all that stuff. And the more food you eat, if it's whole natural plant food, the more of those, as you were saying earlier, we'll call them the time release glucose regulating mechanisms you have along with it.
Correct.
Everything stays in balance. That sounds beautiful. So you mentioned a lot of vegetables also. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about the importance of vegetables in your diet, just maybe in general, and then specifically related to blood glucose regulation?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So your mother taught you back in the day, eat your fruits and vegetables, and she was right. She was absolutely right. Vegetables are some of my favorite foods on the planet, because the way that I think about vegetables is vegetables are not something I gravitate towards for calories per se. Vegetables are something I gravitate towards for nutrient density. When I say that, I look at vegetables as being a antioxidant rich soup, a phytochemical rich soup, a collection of foods that you can eat that have such superior nutrition characteristics that they're some of the most powerful disease fighting foods that you can find in the entire, in the entire spectrum of food. Again, vegetables are calorie poor, but micronutrient rich, meaning they contain a lot of vitamins, minerals, fiber, water, antioxidants, and phytochemicals. And in the process of writing our book, Mastering Diabetes, we got a chance to dive into the sort of antioxidant and phytochemical world, which I know you yourself are a master of.
Dr. Karen's the real master of all those things. But yes, we've delved pretty deep as well. Thank you.
For sure. And vegetables contain an absurdly high quantity and an absurdly high diversity of micronutrients, especially antioxidants and especially phytochemicals. And these are components that are known, or these are sort of nutrients that are known to be, chronic disease fighting. They can lower your blood pressure. They can lower your blood glucose. They can lower your triglyceride levels. They can improve cognitive ability. They can improve nerve function. They can improve the function of glomeruli inside of your kidneys. They can, prevent against excess fatty acid accumulation inside of your liver and muscle, and the list goes on. So, do I put a significant amount of vegetables in my diet on a daily basis, and do I recommend that for other people? The answer is absolutely. How much is up to you. Whether you want to do as an example, you could do 4 pieces of fruit for every vegetable. Just one way to think about it, right? You could do 8 pieces of fruit per vegetable. You could do 2 cups of beans per vegetable, or you could flip it around. It's up to you how many vegetables you want to put in. And going back to what we were saying earlier, a lot of it depends on your energy requirements. If you have a high energy requirement because you're an active individual and you live a very high energy lifestyle, then you might want to gravitate towards things that contain more calories to begin with, like fruits and whole grains and legumes, and then have vegetables as being a component that's a little bit smaller in total volume. Vice versa, if your calorie requirements are low, or maybe you're trying to lose a little bit of weight, you could eat more non-starchy vegetables and more greens and lower your quantity of starchy vegetables and legumes and fruits. And that's another way to kind of keep your calorie intake lower.
Right. So that sounds good. And so with the mix of all that, you get enough calories from the fruits and the starches, you get more nutrient density from the vegetables, and there's lots of recipes that incorporate those things, and it sounds like a really good mix.
Yeah, sometimes I just laugh, Rick. I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes I'm eating food and I laugh and I just think this is the tastiest thing that I've eaten in years. How come I didn't eat like this when I was a kid? If you had served me, a giant quinoa salad with garbanzo beans and broccoli and passion fruit on top when I was a kid, I would have eaten that thing up, right? And I'm eating that now as an adult, and I am so excited about it and so happy about it because it's so flavorful. And, the side effect is that I get the greatest health I've ever had before. So, what's there to complain about?
Yeah, that's awesome. That reminds me, my mom was always trying to get us to eat vegetables when we were young. And, she did this thing. We went through the alphabet, artichokes, and we had some broccoli and some cauliflower. And I don't think we made it much past D or so. It would just, and then my mom's when, getting into health and eating all these salads, she's like, oh, now you're doing it, right? And because that stuff, the original stuff was all canned and overcooked, and it was just kind of, but the salads and the fresh stuff and the vibrant colors and your taste buds change and you feel good. So hear you loud and clear about the veggies.
Yeah,
now,
you gotta,
putting together energy and blood sugar. People are often, so confused about this. Anytime someone's either hungry or they have low energy, the reason, not necessarily from PhDs like yourself, but in the tabloids and the what did you call it? The
pop science.
Pop science. Thank you. Very good term. So in the pop science, the reason is always your blood sugar is low. Right. That's the only thing that causes hunger. That's the only thing that causes low energy. Could you speak to specifically to the energy and blood sugar being low, and can that be a cause of low energy? But the thing is, or are there also lots of other things that may impact that as well?
Absolutely. So yes, having low blood, I'm not even going to call it blood sugar because I think sugar is a misleading term. I'm going to call it blood glucose. Yes. Having low blood glucose can absolutely be a cause of low energy, but it is a minority of the time. I would say for an average individual who, like yourself, who's non-diabetic, the percentage of the time that your blood glucose is truly low, which is less than 70 milligrams per deciliter, is probably maybe 1% of the time, maybe 2% of the time. Okay. I'm talking a very small amount of time. And when you have low blood glucose, it is pretty darn obvious because there's other symptoms that come along for the ride, such as shaky hands, right? Sometimes you start your slurred speech, you can't talk properly. Okay. Sometimes you get little black dots in your vision. Okay. Sometimes you get tunnel vision. Sometimes you start to sweat on your head. You start to sweat on your palms. Okay. Sometimes you get shaky and you can't really balance anymore and you have to sit down. Okay. Those are all symptoms of hypoglycemia and they can get pretty pronounced. So when your glucose truly goes low, look out for those symptoms because those are the ones that actually are strong indicators of it. Okay?
Got it. And most people aren't experiencing all of those things when they think their blood sugar is low. So thank you for making that abundantly clear.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The rest of the time when you're feeling low energy, it's usually due to something else. It's usually due to the fact like maybe you didn't sleep well the night before. Maybe you had some caffeine earlier in the morning and you got a caffeine high and the caffeine's wearing off and all of a sudden now you feel low. Maybe you've been thinking a lot about something and you're cognitively extremely active and you haven't given yourself a break for a long period of time. Maybe you had a workout that was 4 or 5 hours ago and you went really hard and you maybe didn't refuel your body properly after the workout, right? There could be 1,000 different reasons. But if your first thought is, oh, my blood sugar is low, I should eat something, the answer is usually no, that's not the case. The answer is let me figure out what actually I'm feeling low energy from. Let me go fix that. And if food is the answer, okay, fine. Food can certainly be the answer to low energy, but food is not always the answer to low energy.
Well, very well put. And, when I used to, oftentimes when I'm either having a conversation with someone kind of casually or I'm consulting with someone and they say, oh, I'm hypoglycemic, my blood sugar was low. And I always ask them a very simple question. What was your blood sugar or glucose? I know that's a much better term. What was your blood glucose reading when you were experiencing that? And you can already guess. What do they say 99% of the time?
It's like 90 or 85.
Well,
or
actually,
they say, no, I didn't even measure my blood glucose.
There you go. That's what they say, that they didn't even know. So that illustrates that there, and one time, and I shared this with you, I'll just share it real quickly with the audience, when Dr. Karen was becoming Dr. Karen, when she was at a naturopathic medical school, and it was one of the first times we had gotten together as a couple. She was visiting me. This is back when I was at True North. And she said something like, I'm tired or I'm hungry, and I think I'm hypoglycemic, because she had been learning some of that stuff in school, some real science, but some of the pop stuff even makes it into some of those communities. And I said, okay, hold on. I went and got my little glucose tester. I checked her out and she was at 85.
Right.
I'm like, you see? And so anyway, that always stuck with her. But I was very nice about it. But
let me teach you something.
Yeah, well, she was like, "Wow, this is fascinating," and whatnot. So anyway, thank you for clarifying that. So you said like 1 to 2% of the time is low blood glucose is actually causing that, but so many other things. And thank you again for clarifying what actually happens when your blood glucose is truly too low.
Yeah, it's
a big
obvious.
deal.
It's pretty obvious.
And as you know, and now before you switched to a healthier diet and your glucose meter was a random number generator, I love that. Have you experienced that for yourself? If your glucose is down at like 50s or 40s, and have you had those symptoms yourself?
Oh, yeah. That's very common for people living with type 1 diabetes in particular. And the reason for that is because people with type 1 diabetes have the beta cells in their pancreas don't manufacture a sufficient amount of insulin. So because your beta cells don't make insulin, you have to then give yourself insulin to take over the job that they would have been doing for you, right?
Right.
Now, your beta cells are small supercomputers. I mean, they have an exquisite ability to be able to control your blood glucose 24 hours a day, all day long, every day. So if you haven't given your beta cells a giant high five and thanked them for the work that they've been doing, I highly recommend doing that, because they can dose tiny, tiny, tiny amounts of insulin into your blood on a daily, on a minute by minute basis, on a second by second basis, in order to control your blood glucose very well. But when you're, giving yourself a bolus injection of like 4 units because you're about to eat a meal, oftentimes that doesn't necessarily mimic what your beta cells would have done under normal physiological circumstances. So humans, we make errors, we make mistakes. And sometimes it even happens now. I'll give myself a little bit too much insulin. And if I give myself a little bit too much insulin, then my blood glucose can go low. And then when that happens, I know instantly. I mean, it is night and day, because all of a sudden what I feel is that it almost feels like the front of my head is hollow. It almost feels like the beginning and like the front portion of my brain, like my frontal cortex, doesn't exist anymore. And all of a sudden it's like that, just a giant hole in there. And I'm like, oh my God, wow. I can't think properly. I got to do something about this. Check my glucose, 65, 54, something like that. And I'm like, okay, hold on, stop the show. Let me just go eat something small, bring my blood glucose back up to the 80s or 90s, and then I can continue on with life.
Got it. Okay, so in other words, you really know from all the stuff you've studied about this, as well as personal experience, that it's not just like, oh, I'm a little hungry, my glucose must be low. There's some serious, for sure, effects that are undeniable.
Absolutely. I mean, it is effectively, you can think of hypoglycemia as it's an emergency situation for your brain, because your brain is dependent on glucose for 99.9% of your entire life. And when your blood glucose is low, it's a signal to your brain that your brain is literally starving, or your brain is on its way to starving for its primary fuel. And trust me, you do not want to starve your brain for fuel. And so when that situation happens, your brain sends out a bunch of signals to your body to go get some glucose into your. That's why you start sweating. That's why you start shaking. That's why you can't think clearly. That's why your speech gets slurred. Right? You're literally losing cognitive power. And as a result of that, all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, my brain's not working properly. Let me go fix this problem.
Got it. Well, thank you again for that clarification. All right, so let's jump into our next topic, something I know you studied a whole bunch about in its relationship to blood glucose levels, intramyocellular fat. See if anyone can say that 10 times fast, and how we end up with too much of that in our cells, and then how that actually affects our blood glucose more than carbohydrates themselves.
For sure. Okay. So intramyocellular lipid, IMCL. Okay. This is a very, very complicated, fancy, super nerd way of describing excess lipid or excess fatty acids that are stored in your muscle tissue. Okay. So in order to understand what the heck IMCL is and why it's even important, let's take a trip backwards here. Let's go talk about fat inside of food. Okay. When you consume fat rich foods, whether they come from the animal world or the plant world. Okay. Animal world would be like red meat, white meat, chicken, fish, dairy products, shellfish, eggs, bacon, and then foods from the plant world that are fat rich tend to be things like nuts, seeds, avocados, olives, coconuts, and vegetable oil, right? So regardless of the type of food that you're eating, those foods tend to be relatively high in their total fat content. So when you consume the fat from that food, you're actually consuming a triglyceride. So a triglyceride is basically a glycerol molecule. I'm just going to model it here with my hand.
That's what I do too.
So you got a glycerol molecule right here. And then you have 1, 2, 3 fatty acid molecules that are covalently attached to this bad boy. Okay. So you have a triglyceride right here. So you consume triglyceride in food. It goes into your mouth, travels down your esophagus, into your stomach, and then into your small intestine. Inside of your small intestine is you can think of it as it's an enzymatic bioreactor. And this enzymatic bioreactor has enzymes that are manufactured by your liver, by your pancreas, and by your small intestine. And each one of these organs basically puts enzymes, digestive enzymes, into their small intestine. And the goal is to basically break down the components of the food that you're consuming. So that you want to break it down and digest, and then you also want to cut them, and then you also want to absorb them through the walls of your small intestine to get inside of your blood. So your small intestine, when presented with triglycerides, ends up having enzymes that can basically break apart the 3 fatty acids from the glycerol. Okay, the glycerol goes on to do its thing, and the fatty acids are then absorbed through the walls of your small intestine, and they're put into these things called chylomicron particles. These chylomicron particles, they circulate throughout your blood, and their goal is to go deliver fatty acids and cholesterol to tissues all throughout your body. Okay, so they ideally, in an ideal world, if you design this system perfectly, what you would do is you would send these chylomicron particles to your adipose tissue. Your adipose tissue being your fat tissue. And your fat tissue is all over the place, right? It's in your neck, it's in your armpits, it's in your abdomen, it's in your lower, it's in your butt, it's in your quadriceps, it's in your calf muscles, you name it. It's all over the place. So this fat tissue is actually a really safe place to store fatty acids and cholesterol. It's exactly kind of where fatty acids are designed to live, because this tissue is mechanically and enzymatically perfectly designed to be able to absorb fat when it's present, and then to release that fat or to export that fat when that fat is required. So if these chylomicron particles could deliver that directly to the adipose tissue and only the adipose tissue, then diabetes wouldn't even be a consideration in today's world. It'd be a very, very small and relatively unimportant condition, but that's it. But the problem here is that fatty acids get inside of your adipose tissue. But in addition to that, fatty acids get inside of your liver and they get inside of your muscle, because these chylomicron particles also deliver to those 2 tissues. Everything would be fine if the total amount of fat that you're consuming in your diet is small, because your liver and muscle are only capable of uptaking and utilizing or storing a small amount of total fatty acids. But when the fat content of your diet increases, and in particular, when the saturated fat content of your diet increases, the saturated fatty acid molecules get inside of your adipose tissue, and then they get inside of your liver and they get inside of your muscle. And when you're eating a high fat diet, which is very common in today's world, then within a short period of time, your liver and muscles end up over accumulating saturated fat. Okay, again, saturated fat has a time and a place inside of your liver and muscle in small quantities. But when you put too much of them inside of your liver and fat, inside of your liver and muscle, the lipid droplet inside of those 2 tissues, inside of cells in those tissues, ends up growing and growing and growing and growing and growing, getting larger than its physiological design. And when that happens, what the cells inside of your liver and muscle do is they initiate a self-defense mechanism. And the self-defense mechanism is designed to try and slow down the rate at which energy is coming inside of those 2 tissues. That's what their goal is. They're like, how can we slow down these fatty acids from getting in here? And the answer is, if you're a cell anywhere in your body and you want to slow down the rate of energy coming in, you do one thing and one thing only, and that is you block insulin. You make it so that insulin cannot communicate with you very easily. And as a result of that, if you create an environment where insulin signaling doesn't work very well, then you've done a very good job at blocking more energy from coming inside. Not completely, but you've lowered the rate at which stuff can come inside. So that's what these 2 tissues do, is they initiate this self-defense mechanism. And by doing that, now these 2 tissues are basically slightly protected against more influx of these fatty acids. Mm-hmm. And it enables them to try and burn the existing supply that's already inside of them. So here's the crux of the argument. When you're in that state, the insulin resistant state, and then you try and consume something that's carbohydrate rich, like a banana, literally 1 fruit, or maybe 1 bowl of quinoa, or maybe a bowl of black beans, okay? Something that doesn't really contain that much carbohydrate, but just enough that the glucose from those carbohydrate molecules tries to get inside of your liver and muscle where it belongs. So insulin comes along and goes, hey, knock, knock, liver, knock, knock, muscle. There's glucose in the blood. Do you want to take it up?
And they're like, no, thank you.
Like, hey, no. First of all, I'm not listening to you right now. I'm resisting you. I'm blocking you from communicating with me. I'm closed for business. I'll see you later. So classic insulin resistance is where insulin is less effective or inefficient And insulin cannot signal to those two tissues. And as a result of that, glucose remains trapped in your blood.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result of that, the glucose that's trapped in your blood is now elevating your blood glucose. Okay. When you measure your glucose using a glucometer or using a continuous glucose monitor, you are measuring the amount of glucose in your blood. And if that glucose has been trapped inside of your blood because it cannot exit and get inside of your liver or your muscle, the net result is because your liver and muscle have a traffic jam, literally a metabolic traffic jam, which is preventing the glucose from getting inside. So long story short, IMCL, intramyocellular lipid, okay? Excess fatty acids stored inside of your muscle. There's the corollary to that is called IMTG, intramyocellular triglyceride. I'm sorry, IHTG, my fault, IHTG, intrahepatic triglyceride, okay?
Okay, liver.
And that means excess fatty acids stored inside of your liver. So the combination of too much in your liver and too much in your muscle tissue ends up resulting in a traffic jam, which causes your blood glucose to go high. And what most people believe is they say, oh, okay, well, it was the banana that made my blood glucose go high, right? Because I just proved it to you. I ate a banana and my blood glucose went high. Therefore, it's the banana's fault. And in reality, the answer is like, no. The banana was just broken down into glucose and the glucose got trapped. But it's not the banana's fault for trapping the glucose. It's the IMCL and the IHTG that caused the glucose to get trapped.
Got it. So it depends on the condition of the cells. Are they ready, or do they need more energy at the time or not? And just for the audience, and I know you know this, and it's easier when you're listening than when you're the one explaining. So we know the brain uses a lot of glucose.
Correct.
And it uses a lot per its weight. It uses a lot, but we've got a lot more muscle mass, lean tissue than we do brain. And so the biggest overall consumer of glucose is your muscles. Absolutely. And your liver uses a lot too. So when whatever they do has a huge impact on glucose, and that's why it has the effects that you just, so I just wanted to help clarify that for the audience. And that explains then, and this is where, and thank you for that very clear explanation. They're basically saying we're full right now. Mm-hmm. We like bananas, but we're full right now. Wait a little while until we're not full. Then we can just bring the glucose from the banana in, no problem, or the fructose in that case as well. And that gets a little more complicated after that. But then that explains then when you eat the banana on its own, it doesn't have excessive fat. It helps to create the conditions where the carbohydrates from it can be utilized by your muscle and your liver cells. And then, but most people don't get to that point. And you're so clear, they're eating all the fat, then they have the banana, then their glucose goes up. And just like you said, they say, you see, it didn't work.
That's exactly right.
But then when people keep it up more than a couple of meals, which most people don't because they've never been educated and their doctors have told them it's a bad idea, they don't get to experience those benefits like you and your thousands of participants and other people around the world for decades have.
That's exactly right. And so a simple way to think about it is that in a high-fat environment, carbohydrate metabolism is sacrificed.
Yep, perfect.
Okay? In a low-fat environment, carbohydrate metabolism is prioritized. So the two of them effectively work in opposite to one another.
Got it.
So the trick is really to, like you're saying, make the conditions ideal for carbohydrate metabolism. And the way that you do that is by eating a low-fat diet.
That is fantastic. And we are what we eat. So whatever goes in here ends up in our cells and affects insulin signaling and affects our blood glucose levels. So that's good.
Question.
Now, you mentioned that you said at one point, especially saturated fat.
Right.
So if I'm consuming an excess amount of fat, not that you'd want to do this, you don't need very much, but let's say I got overboard on some recipe with chia in it versus going overboard on a recipe made from dairy products.
Correct.
Even if it's the total amount of fat intake in the two is the same, because the fatty acid profile is different, does that affect all those mechanisms you were just referring to?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And I'm glad you brought that up, because all fat is not created equal. There's trans fat, there's saturated fat, and there's unsaturated fat. And we could do literally an entire separate conversation that would last an hour, where we sort of break down and go into detail here about each one of these types of fat. But suffice it to say, for the time being,
we've had some of those conversations like in different interviews, but yes.
Absolutely.
Awesome
Yeah. And you know this like the back of your hand, for sure. Trans fat is the worst. Okay. Trans fat from hydrogenated oils from, a hydrogenation process, just get them out of your diet, period, end of story. Those things can not only degrade your cardiovascular health, but they can also set you up for insulin resistance and increase your risk for many chronic diseases. The second most problematic type of fatty acid is saturated fat. Saturated fat definitely has some negative cardiovascular complications, can absolutely increase your LDL concentration, and can increase your risk for heart disease, no questions asked. In addition to that, it can also cause this deposition of intramyocellular lipid and intrahepatic triglyceride, causing insulin resistance in both of those tissues. Unsaturated fatty acids tend to be the least problematic of the three of them. And so if you have a diet that's high in unsaturated fatty acids, then you're more protected against insulin resistance. But I will tell you that people who eat a plant-based diet but are eating a lot of fat-rich foods like avocados, nuts and seeds, chia seeds in particular, olives, coconuts, they also have a much more difficult time controlling their blood glucose than do people who choose to eat a low-fat plant-based whole food diet, right? So That's a long-winded way of me saying eating fat-rich plants is better than eating fat-rich animal products, but still maintaining a low-fat total intake is really what's going to get you the best results when it comes to insulin sensitivity.
Got it. So people can have a little more flexibility with the plant fats, but still obviously don't want to go overboard.
You don't want to go overboard. Anything over approximately 15% of total calories is what we find to be sort of like the sweet spot. If you're over 15%, then you can end up with more blood glucose regulation problems. If you're sort of between 10 and 15% of total calories as fat, and most of that's coming from plant sources, then you should be golden and your blood glucose can be regulated nicely.
So do you have any estimate of, if you're at 15% total calories from fat, animal-based, what the equivalent percentage fat-wise to create the same approximate amount of insulin resistance would be from plant fat? Any just kind of guesstimate?
Nobody has ever asked. Like, I have never even thought about that.
I've been wondering that for a while, and I've been wondering, is it an absolute amount of saturated fat? And if there's half as much saturated fat in plant foods, could you go to 30%? That still seems a little high to me, but I don't know, something we'll have to chat about at some point and see.
It would be fun actually to put some math on a piece of paper, because you're right. One hypothesis would be that it's just the total amount of saturated fat that actually matters. And that's a reasonable hypothesis, but let's sit down and do that. I think that'd be a fun time.
Okay, well, we'll nerd out without boring everybody with too much stuff. Okay, so that's great. So the bottom line is the type of fat does matter, but still, and a little bit of avocado. Like when we just interviewed Robbie, we saw his fruit batch behind him, like he always likes to have. He had an avocado there. We talked about that a little bit. So there's a little bit of flexibility there, but still don't go overboard. And I've had people, even like within the raw food community, they are eating a high fat diet from all that gourmet food, but then they say things like, don't eat bananas. And of course, knowing all this stuff for years, I'm like, no, you guys got it backwards. But like you said, they're going overboard on the almonds and the Brazil nuts and the macadamia nuts and the avocados and the coconut. And banana, the cells say, no, we have too much energy now, and the banana doesn't do well. Keep it in the bloodstream. And so same thing can happen. So
you got it. You nailed it.
Okay. Right. So, all right. Now, you mentioned, for example, that some of the same things with those lipids that affect insulin signaling also do things like LDL, not good for vascular disease. So that really brings us into the next question. Could you expand a little bit more on, even if probably most of our audience out there is not living with diabetes, So these same recommendations you have to help either reverse most types of diabetes or make type 1 much more manageable. Even if somebody's not dealing with that, why else might someone want to follow your recommendations?
For sure, for sure. So let's talk about cardiovascular disease, or we'll call it, let's talk about cholesterol in particular, because your cholesterol values, if you asked me this question and you said, hey, Cyrus, what actually causes your cholesterol level in your blood to go up? Okay. There are multiple factors that can cause your cholesterol level to go up. There are genetic factors that can certainly elevate your cholesterol level, no question. There's a condition called familial hypercholesterolemia, FH, which is an absolute real genetic mutation that can certainly elevate your LDL concentration, which is your quote unquote bad cholesterol. And if you have a double mutation of the same gene that can cause what's called a homozygote, your cholesterol level is absolutely through the roof. And so for those people, statin medication is absolutely required. You can also have what's called a high lipoprotein little a concentration.
Could I interrupt you just for a second? Even for people with a familial hypercholesterolemia, it's going to be high no matter what. But can diet still, there's still a range. They're going to be higher than people without that. And then here's the range, high fat, saturated fat versus lower fat. They're going to be higher, but does diet still
100%
give you a range?
Thank you for the clarification. You're right. So what I was saying about statin medication is, yes, the statin medication is often the right prescription for those people. But in addition to statin medication, still consume a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet, no questions asked.
And then maybe that gives them a little lower dose of that, less likelihood of side effects. So it does
That's
still
exactly
matter.
Right.
Okay, great.
But then in addition to that, so you have the amount of cholesterol in your food can definitely influence the amount of cholesterol inside of your blood. There's a lot of people who will refute that and say, no, the cholesterol in your food has no bearing, has literally no influence on the cholesterol inside of your blood. And if you want to make that claim, you're welcome to make that claim, but that goes in direct violation to what the evidence-based literature demonstrates.
Could I jump in real fast with that?
Please.
What they do is they take people on high cholesterol diets,
Correct.
And then they lower it a bit. And then they say from really high to still pretty high, it doesn't matter. What they don't study is the people who have no cholesterol and low overall total fat, who eat lots of fruits and vegetables. And with that, we do see definite lower levels. It's like saying, okay, let's look at a pack and a half a day smokers versus 2-pack a day smokers. There's no difference in cancer outcomes. Therefore, smoking doesn't contribute to cancer. It's like they got to look at non-smokers. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
No, you're absolutely right. If you study the right group of people, you will find that cholesterol in your food absolutely has a profound impact on cholesterol in your blood. And you can actually measure this within hours of the cholesterol-rich food entering your mouth, right? You don't have to wait months, years in order to see a rise in your cholesterol level. You can actually measure it within a couple hours, and you will see that when you eat a cholesterol-rich food that you can monitor over the course of these, a 2 to 3 to 4 hour time window, you will see your cholesterol levels rise by 10, 20 points.
Yeah, and Dr. McDougall's done early research, puts people on a cholesterol-free, high-fiber diet, and they're, when people's cholesterol is really high, it comes down like 100 points in 12 days. It's like, but again, the researchers making the claims didn't study that group of people.
Absolutely. There's one study in particular that I'm just going to pull up here as we're talking. But there's also another component of your diet which elevates your cholesterol values, which elevates your LDL cholesterol in your blood. And that is saturated fat.
There it comes again.
Okay. So we talked about the fact that saturated fat can increase your risk for insulin resistance by causing deposition inside of your liver and muscle. But saturated fat actually is more powerful than cholesterol at increasing your cholesterol, which is counterintuitive because you would say, well, wait a minute, you're telling me that saturated fat has more of an influence on my cholesterol than cholesterol does? That doesn't make any sense, right? But the truth is that is the case. So there's actually some very powerful evidence-based research that has not only just investigated this, but actually proven this. And I am trying to pull up the actual science paper here that demonstrates this. But simply adopting a diet in which you limit your saturated fat intake by by lowering your saturated fat intake by something like 20 to 30%, which is not hard to do. It really isn't that hard to do, can lead to a dramatic change in your LDL cholesterol, can lead to a drop of about 20 to 30 points within the first month. Okay, so if high cholesterol is something that you suffer from, or if you're taking a statin medication and maybe you're experiencing some of the unnecessary side effects of a statin medication, then simply lowering the triglyceride value, aka lowering the fat content of your diet, and especially focusing on saturated fat, can have a very powerful effect.
Got it. And then, and it just goes on from there, because if you're eating less cholesterol and less saturated fat, that's fewer animal products. You still need enough calories. What do you eat in their place? Whole natural plant foods, phytonutrients, antioxidants, all that fiber you mentioned, healthier fatty acid profile, and then diabetes, vascular disease, hypertension, obesity, on and on and on. So,
and on and on and on. Exactly right.
And we could probably go on for another couple hours with each discussing those. So anyway, thank you for at least, giving everyone some clarification on at least one of those issues, which is fantastic. Sure. So thank you. Sure. Now, let's see, there's so many other things we'd like to ask you. We're getting into the extra credit time here, so we don't want to take your entire day.
No worries.
But how about exercise? So any of I know you have some presentations where you show yourself with your shirt off. You are obviously no stranger to exercise personally, and I know you've studied it very thoroughly in terms of the effects and science of how it affects our physiology, blood glucose wise and otherwise. But can you talk just a bit about the importance of exercise in maintaining a healthy blood glucose level, which again, not only affects diabetes, but so many other things simultaneously?
For sure. So exercise is one of my favorite topics of all. And the reason for that is number one, I'm infatuated with exercise, no questions asked. But the benefits of exercise are tremendous. Okay. So exercise you can think of exercise as basically being one of your most powerful chronic disease reversing tools that you have at your disposal. Okay. And the reason I say that is because the benefits of exercise occur in every single tissue that I can think of. Okay. So when you're exercising, you might think to yourself, okay, I'm going to the gym. I'm going to do some pull-ups. I'm going to do some push-ups. I'm going to get on the elliptical, and I'm going to work out my muscles. And that is a true statement, because your muscles will do the mechanical work. But in addition to that, every other tissue in your body benefits from it. Okay. The connective tissue that's attached to your muscles benefits. Your bone density increases because your bones have to become stronger to support stronger muscles. That's a good thing. Your large intestine benefits as a result of exercise. Your brain benefits as a result of exercise. Neural pathways between your brain and your musculature get strengthened, and it then decreases your risk for cognitive decline into the future. I'm sure you know the Sherzais, Dean and Aisha Sherzai.
Yes, absolutely.
Who are very prominent researchers in the world of Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. And they've actually discovered that people who perform more lower body exercise in particular end up with stronger brains over the course of time. They're actually at a lower risk for dementia when they get older, simply because they have stronger legs. And that was something that was actually mind-blowing to me. But in addition to that, your vasculature is such an important tissue, if you will. Your heart and your cardiovascular system benefits so tremendously when you're performing exercise, because the act of moving blood through your cardiovascular system at a faster velocity causes your heart to have to do more work, causes the muscles in your heart to have to strengthen, causes the ability of blood vessels to dilate and allow more oxygen to get delivered into tissues, causes more waste to be pulled out of tissues and put back into your blood, allows your kidney to start doing its job faster and more effectively because it has to pull waste out of your blood and put it into the toilet. So there's a whole cascade of events that happens when you accelerate blood flow and when you exercise. And it's a very powerful tool that I recommend that people integrate into their lifestyle on a daily basis. My recommendation, general recommendation, is a minimum of 30 minutes per day. 30, 45 is better, 60 is even better. Okay.
Now, just to clarify, does this have to be like, do people have to get a body like yours to get these benefits, or is a 30-minute casual walk still beneficial?
Yeah, exactly. I was just about to say that.
Oh, sorry.
You don't even have to dedicate 30 minutes at one time. The research shows that there's these things called exercise snacks, which is this cool concept that you can basically just be like, oh, you know what? I'm going to go do 10 minutes of exercise right now, 10 minutes of movement. Don't even call it exercise. I'm just going to move my body for 10 minutes. And then a couple hours later, I'm going to do 10 more minutes now. And then a couple hours later, I'm going to do 10 more minutes later, right? So if you were to break up exercise into smaller pieces over the course of a day, you could still get a tremendous effect. You're probably not going to turn into an Olympic athlete that way, and that's fine. You're probably not going to turn into that's not going to increase your VO2 max and turn you into a competitive athlete, but that's okay. If that's not your goal and you're just using this as a chronic disease reversal tool or a chronic disease prevention tool, then do small amounts of exercise, keep an overall active lifestyle, and target a minimum of 30 minutes of movement per day. And when you can do that, then you are going to benefit significantly.
Beautiful, beautiful. And then how about, is there something to the thinking that your large skeletal muscles demand more glucose, and that helps them tell insulin to let the stuff in and get it out of your blood vessels and that
Yes,
type of thing?
Exactly right. So when you move your muscles, what you're effectively doing is you're forcing them to contract and elongate hundreds, if not thousands of times within a short period of time. And as a result of that, they're performing mechanical work, which then forces them to oxidize or burn, if you will, the onboard glycogen, which is a stored form of glucose, and the onboard fatty acids, which we talked about earlier, because those are internal fuel depots. So when you use your muscles, you're sort of like depleting their internal fuel stores. And when they deplete their internal fuel stores, then they get hungry. And then they say, you know what? Now I need more nutrients. Give me more glucose.
Tank's empty.
Right? The tank's empty, and the tank is emptying. So give me more of this stuff. So that's part of the reason why when you're done with exercise, you actually feel hungrier, is because it's literally a biological hunger that's coming from your muscle tissue. Your muscle is basically saying, I need nutrients. Give me nutrients. And then that message gets translated to your brain that says, oh, look, I'm going to go eat some potatoes. Right? Oh, look, I'm going to go eat that acai bowl, you name it. Right?
Nice. Excellent. And you're also saying that because fat is a concentrated source of energy, that the exercise actually helps take those globules of the intramyocellular lipid and use that for energy. So you have less of those guys in there saying we're full. It's like that. Let's let the stuff in.
Absolutely. Yeah. So your muscle tissue is going to prioritize, depending on the amount of exercise you do, the intensity with which you do that exercise, and the duration of exercise. All of those matter in determining which fuel inside of your muscle tissue is going to be used at what moment in time. But just to keep things real simple, when you use your muscle tissue, you're depleting both your glycogen stores and your fatty acid depots at the same time. Sometimes you're going to be doing more glycogen, sometimes you're going to be doing more fatty acids. It kind of like goes back and forth. But the idea here is that you're going to try and deplete both of those tanks, and that happens. And by depleting those tanks, you gain insulin sensitivity as your muscle tissue begins to ask for more glucose and open its doors for glucose to start coming back in after the exercise is over.
Beautiful. So that sounds fantastic. So helps your brain, helps your blood sugar, helps your muscles, helps your bones, and then there's so many interrelationships there.
For sure.
Lower your blood sugar, fewer glycation reactions. You don't cross-link up LDL cholesterol. It can get into cells it's not in your blood, on and on and on.
Exactly. It's literally thousands of effects. And it would actually be fun to like write down what those effects are, because I think the medical world has a pretty decent idea of what could unfold or what does unfold, but still the true benefits of exercise, I think, are beyond human comprehension at this point.
Yeah, Just phenomenal. And I always say it every time I'm done with the workout. I think it affected my brain more than the rest of my body because everything feels good. But I'm just like, oh, I can type faster. I'm sharper. You just really notice.
Yeah, I'm glad you can feel that actually, because I've talked to some mental health professionals as well, and they tell me that one of the most powerful things you can do if you're struggling with depression or anxiety is exercise. Go move your body, because the actual like biochemical alterations that happen inside of your brain in terms of like neurogenesis, making new nervous tissue, as well as releasing certain neurotransmitters inside of your brain that make you feel a little bit happier and a little bit more relaxed. All of that is happening inside of your brain as a result of just moving your body. So move your muscles, and your brain is just bathed in a sea of, optimal, biochemical, neurotransmitters that actually ends up making you feel like $1,000,000.
Yeah, life's better. You have more hope. You're more confident. You can accomplish your goals. You can eat better. And then there's all the synergistic effects. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit it.
So you and Robbie have your program Mastering Diabetes, where you get people on a low but healthy, appropriate fat diet with lots of fiber, phytonutrients, all the things and so much more that you shared here, as
Correct.
well as exercise. And you put that all together to get synergistic effects. Are there any particular case histories maybe that you're especially enthused about that pop into your brain that you might want to share to give the audience an idea of what could be in store for them? Because we know it's kind of hard to give things up at first, but when there's so many benefits coming at them and they get to experience it, it's a little easier. So any kind of inspirational case histories you'd like to share?
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you asked this question, because there's so many that are flooding through my brain right now. I'm just trying to think of like what's the most ideal one to talk about. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite stories of all time is Raj. So Raj is he's a father of two, and he is an Indian American guy who has been living up in the Northeast for a good portion of his life. So he's a busy guy. He's an entrepreneur. He runs multiple businesses, and he works really hard. So over the course of time, he developed fatty liver disease and type 2 diabetes and obesity at the same time. So he gained a significant amount of weight and technically had a BMI that was greater than 35. He had developed type 2 diabetes, and his fasting blood glucose was high, and his post-meal blood glucose was actually, fasting glucose was 180, right? So this twice as high as it was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And he developed fatty liver disease, and he was listening to his son and his son's friend talk to each other one day. And they were talking about going and playing basketball. And his son's friend turned to him and said, "Hey, do you want to invite your dad so he can play with us?" And his son responded by saying, No, don't invite dad. He's too slow. He can't keep up with us anymore." And then they went outside and they played. And Raj heard that, and it sent him into a giant downward spiral. And he said, "My son doesn't even want to play with me anymore because he says I'm too slow. He says, what he's insinuating, I'm too fat. I'm too slow. I can't keep up with them. It's not fun for them." And so the minute he heard that, he said, "You know what? Enough is enough. I refuse to live like this." So he started finding ways that he can become healthier. He found the Mastering Diabetes program. He started eating the way that we described. He ate a ton more plants. He lowered his saturated fat intake. He lowered his animal product intake. Within a 6-month period, Raj lost 80 plus pounds.
Wow.
He lost 80 plus pounds. He lowered his fasting blood glucose. He was technically undiagnosed as type 2 diabetes or having type 2 diabetes. He stopped using metformin because he was diagnosed to use 2,000 milligrams of metformin per day. And he went back to his liver doctor, and his liver doctor basically said, "Hey, by the way, you don't have fatty liver disease anymore. It's gone." Right? And fatty liver disease is not generally thought of as being a reversible condition. The Western medicine world does not really think about it that way. So his doctor was very surprised by that and said, "I've never even seen this before." And Raj was basically like, "You know what? I'm reborn from the inside out. I am a new human being. I feel like $1,000,000. I'm at my normal body weight. I don't have diabetes anymore. My cardiovascular health is in great shape. And guess what? I'm playing with my son, and I'm running that guy into the ground." right?
That is awesome. And I'm sure you have so many more of those stories. It's interesting. I went to high school with a guy named Raj who has 2 sons who still lives in Connecticut. I don't know if
Oh,
it's the
no way.
same guy, but I'll have to send him a Facebook message and see if that was him. And it's so phenomenal. Not only did his diabetes reverse, but so many other benefits as well, just like we were speaking about earlier. So what a perfect example. And, just a side note that came up when you said this is different things motivate different people.
Right.
So for him, quality time with his kid, and that I can hardly think of a better reason than that. That's phenomenal. But other people, it's vanity. Other people, they don't like the side effects of the medication. Whatever the case may be. So it's great that happened.
Correct.
And got him to change his course, got him to feel the consequences of his actions to motivate him to take a whole new course. And luckily, he found you and Robbie in your program. And I mean, you can't put a price on the quality of life that he has now that's so dramatically improved.
It's so true. It's so true. Everybody has like a different reason that they get involved. For me, it was type 1 diabetes and having glucose that was uncontrollable. For Raj, it was because his son made fun of him, right? For some other people, they feel like their joints are hurting. Other people feel like, the doctor basically says, hey, you have to inject this thing called insulin every single day. And whatever it is, there's something likely that you may have heard or that, could happen to you in the future, which is going to scare you, and it's going to scare you into action. And that's okay. And unfortunately, human beings are sometimes have to wait until they get scared in order to take action. And what I would like to see more people doing is taking a proactive approach and not waiting until something negative happens to their health, but being preventative and acting in a preventative manner so that they can prevent any kind of chronic disease from happening in the first place. And I think there's a growing number of people that are doing this now. And when I really hear about people who say, no, I don't have any disease right now, I just want to eat so that I don't develop a disease, that right there is, I think, the true key to excellent long-term health.
Absolutely. And once someone starts to get on this type of track, I mean, is it one of those things where it's going to be a year or two before they notice benefits, or do things start happening pretty short term?
Weeks. It's unbelievable. I mean, I felt the difference within 24 hours. I could see it in my blood glucose meter. I could see it in my insulin use. We hear people reporting to us constantly. They're like, we hear this message. They say, guys, I'm not even doing what you're telling me to do. I literally just changed my breakfast. That's it. Right? You want me to change my breakfast, my lunch, my dinner, start exercising a little bit more, start doing some intermittent fasting and beyond. I did one of the things that you told me to do. It's been a week. I've already lost 4 pounds and I feel way more energy. And now I feel like $1 million. That's crazy, right? And then it gets better and better and better over the course of time. No question. Which I'm sure you've probably seen very similar results as well, right?
Oh, every time Dr. Karen and I, go for a walk or work out, we're like, oh my God, I just feel so much different than I did a half an hour ago.
Right.
So yeah, and that's really encouraging for people. And that's why it's nice to say, look, just try it out give it a week or give it a month. And then people are in a whole different place at the end of that time period. And then you've got the positive incentive to keep going.
Absolutely. Yeah. A little taste of a benefit really kind of gets you thirsty for more.
Yep. And then, yeah, just keeps reinforcing itself. So we talked about different components of energy here. Energy Reset Summit. We've got the reset component here as well. So if somebody, maybe they're on track, or maybe they've never started getting on track, some stress comes into their life, they find themselves off track. Do you have any particular recommendations or thoughts on how someone can kind of reset themselves mindset wise and diet wise and just jump right back in and get right back on track again?
Yeah. So one of the things that I actually find to be a really powerful way, a temporary thing that most people can do to sort of like reset, is to stop eating food temporarily. Okay. To do an intermittent fast. Okay. And the reason I say that is because food is necessary. Food is important. Food is required in order to live an optimal, healthy life. But a lot of people feel like if they were to stop eating food for 24 hours or 48 hours, that something bad would happen to them. And the truth is that 99% of all humans can easily stop eating food for 24 to 48 hours. And not only will nothing bad happen, but probably phenomenal things can happen, right? So the reason there's 100 reasons why I like intermittent fasting, but it's one of the most powerful things that it can do is it can reestablish, it can sort of like change the way that your brain interacts with food, right? So if you're constantly operating under this idea that like, oh, okay, I need to eat food, I have to eat food, I must eat food, otherwise if I don't, then something bad's going to happen to me. And you change that pattern and you just do it temporarily. Oftentimes what people find is that, number one, they have more energy than they had in their regular life when they were eating food constantly. And number two, their emotional relationship with food changes. And they recognize really quickly, they're like, you know what? Food is necessary for me for absolutely, but I don't want to live in fear. I don't want to be captive to the food that I'm eating, thinking that I have to put in something new every 3 hours, every 5 hours, every 7 hours in order to prevent some vague situation from happening to me. So there's an emotional relationship that we all have to the food that we eat. And when you change that relationship in a short period of time, you can also, it can help you think about food in a completely different way. Mm-hmm. But because it's the energy reset sum, we're talking about energy levels, I'll be the first person to tell you that sometimes when I perform an intermittent fast, or one of the feedback, one of the things that I hear from a lot of the people is that the minute they stop eating food for 24 to 48 hours, they have more energy than they've felt in a very long time, right? I don't know if I have the argument, like the biological mechanism as to why they might have more energy. Maybe you have the answer to that, but it's something that I hear over and over and over again from people, and I love hearing that because it's another reinforcing, mechanism to teach them that sometimes less is more.
Yeah, I saw that a lot as a fasting practitioner. It's amazing. I mean, a few days in, your glycogen's out, you're in ketosis. When you go that far in, oftentimes people have less energy, but sometimes they have more. Sometimes their just brain is clear and they feel amazing. And right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And every time I just spend some time, water for a few days or juice for a few days, it does remind me, just like you're saying, it's like, I don't always need to eat that extra thing, watching TV late at night. And it just reminds you, like you feel so good and so clear that you don't need all that extra food. So that sounds like a perfect strategy. Now, Absolutely. What if someone's not necessarily ready to go without food for an entire 24 or 48 hours? Can a 16-hour fasting window or a little more short term, just skipping a meal or two, or just having juice or a couple pieces of fruit for a meal, super light, can that kind of approximate the reset mechanism also?
Absolutely. You hit it on the head. Just skip a meal. If you skip a meal, you effectively can create a 16-hour fast. So either what I would recommend is you either skip breakfast or you skip dinner, because if you skip one of those two meals, and then you combine that with your sleeping window, then you effectively have created a 16-hour block where there's no food coming into your body. And if you were to just start with that, you might recognize exactly what we're talking about, that maybe you feel better, maybe you feel more mentally clear, maybe you have more energy, and that it's actually not that hard to do. And then from that point onwards, you can extend it if you wanted to do it into a 24-hour fast or maybe a 36-hour fast. And then, then you can start to see what the benefits of extended duration fasting are. And, hopefully you can also experience some positive benefits from that as well.
That sounds great. And thank you for clarifying. So just like with anything, we want to have people do enough to make a real difference so they'll get the benefits and then keep that positive reinforcement going. But we don't want to set the bar too high that it's just not going to happen. So if they want to get some cardiovascular exercise, they don't have to start with a 5-mile run. They can walk for 20 minutes or 10 minutes and keep going from there. So same thing, skip a meal, clear things out a little bit and go from there.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Yep. All right, so Dr. Khambatta, we could talk to you for hours and hours more about science and all the practical stuff. We've got some extracurricular time in here, which we really appreciate. I know I do, and I hope our audience does as well. For those who want to continue the conversation and learn more, not only about managing blood glucose, but about getting healthier in general, where can they go to keep the conversation going?
Yeah, thank you so much. So if anybody's interested in learning more about, what we do, we work particularly with people with all forms of diabetes. So it's type 1, type 1.5, pre-diabetes, type 2, gestational. You just go to masteringdiabetes.org. So masteringdiabetes.org is where you can find us on the web. We have all types of resources. We have a podcast, which is totally free. We have an Instagram account where we're sharing about a bunch of stuff that we're doing on a daily basis. You can find us there at Mastering Diabetes as well. But most importantly, I would recommend just come to our website. Come to our website and just read the stuff that we've written. We write all about diabetes and all the tentacles of diabetes that are, associated with it. And chances are, if you have a question, you're probably going to find an answer to it. We like to think of ourselves as being kind of like a one-stop resource, a one-stop shop for people, with diabetes. And then we also are publishing a lot of recipes. And when I'm bored, I literally will go to our recipes page and I will just look at the pictures because they are very, very tasty. And, if you like to eat, then it's going to be a fun place for you.
That sounds fantastic. And no matter what you're dealing with, even if you're really healthy, those sound like, knowing what you know and what you and Robbie have put together and the results that you get, I would imagine those are excellent recipes.
No doubt. No doubt.
And my guess is, even if someone isn't dealing with diabetes, given how prevalent it is today, they've probably got a friend or family member who are. And they can help those people. They can get healthier at the same time and support each other. And, just that the world can be a healthier place following this advice. You
got it. You hit it on the head. Yeah. We also wrote the book Mastering Diabetes, which, as you mentioned earlier, became a New York Times bestseller, which we were very excited about. And the number one question we got from people is, do I have to have diabetes to pay attention to this? And my answer was no, of course not. Because remember what we said earlier, prevention is more powerful than reversal, right? I want you to reverse. There's no question about it, but I would prefer that you prevent.
Sure.
And this methodology enables you to prevent before the problem occurs. So if you really put this information to play, it can make a profound difference in your life that will lower your risk for diabetes. And then again, all of the tentacles of diabetes, including cardiovascular disease, including dementia and cognitive decline, fatty liver disease, chronic kidney disease, many different types of autoimmune conditions, and the list goes on.
Right. And all those things without diabetes, people don't want either. So
sure.
Doing yourself a lot of good.
Absolutely.
All right. So Doc, anything you'd like to just kind of summarize before we finish up with this interview?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I think intimidates people about this idea of eating more plants is that they feel like if they don't go all in and they don't go from, they don't go to 100% plant-based diet, that they're doing something wrong and it's not going to work. And rather than thinking about it, if thinking about eating a plant-based diet kind of scares you and seems like too big of a change, and maybe, your boyfriend's not going to want to do it, or your husband or your wife or your family members aren't going to be on board. What I would say is two things. Number one, do it slowly, right? Just think about it as very simple. Just eat more plants. That's it. All I want you to do is just try and eat a little bit more plants tomorrow than you did today, right? Even if that means one serving more, that's fine, but just step into it over time. And then secondarily, do it because you want to do it for yourself, and try not to let the world complicate things for you. Don't let social situations and Thanksgiving and holidays and travel get in the way. Just do it for yourself, and do it very systematically in a step-by-step manner. And when you do it, hopefully you will feel it. And as a result of feeling it, you're going to make a huge impact to yourself, which will eventually impact other people as well.
I love that. Love yourself, and don't make it too hard to start. Just get on the path. And just like we were talking earlier, you lower those hurdles to get started, and you start making difference, and progress is, great. even if you're not getting all the benefits, some's better than none.
100%. You hit it on the head.
All right, Dr. Khambatta, that sounds like great advice, and we will leave it there. We thank you so much for all this wisdom and all this inspiration, and we thank all of you for tuning in. I'm your co-host, Dr. Rick Dina, on the Energy Reset Summit 2021. We'll see you on the next interview.